For those of you that are joining us for the first time today, we welcome you to this three-part series. Again, my name is Kimberly O'Neal, as James just said, and I have the honor, and I don't take this for granted, I have the honor in serving you all and helping you to understand the importance of capacity building by focusing on nonprofit governance. Last week, when we started our series with the first session, our first discussion, we talked about how to develop a responsible and a responsive board of directors. And what we wanted to ensure is that many of you who have had some challenges with identifying board members, what are board members responsible for? What should they be doing? What are the roles and the differences between admin and the board? We wanted to ensure that you had that foundation before we moved on in our conversations. And this week, we have the honor of having a presentation and a fireside chat with my friends from Board Build. And this week, we're going to talk about how to match with well-trained and committed board members. For many of you that I know from our community here in North Texas, and for those of you that may be joining us from around the country, we know that there's sometimes some challenges with identifying the right fit. And what does that look like? Last week, we touched on it a little bit towards the end of the session when we started talking about how to put together a board matrix to identify the most important personalities and skill sets that are needed to really bolster up your boards. Well, this week, we're going to take it a little bit further. What the description is for today is effective leadership within nonprofit boards is essential to the success of the organization. And while nonprofits are committed to building solid boards, they sometimes face challenges in identifying leaders who understand the governance responsibilities. This session today will highlight the access to the board professional development training and matching service available in North Texas through our friends in Tarrant County that serve our entire community in the region, Board Build. And I'm really excited for us to have this foundation today, not for us just to talk about the service, but for you all to actually hear today what is available for you, depending upon where you serve. And if you have existing board vacancies, the opportunities that you have to be able to post those vacancies through the Board Build system. And as we anchor through today, one thing that I want to make sure that you do is, as you hear something and you're not sure of it, you might want to chat with us in the chat, but utilize the Q&A function. It's going to be important because when we go into our fireside chat and when we go into our structured Q&A session, we are going to pull those questions to ensure that we can answer as many as we can today for you. One thing about this session today is that we have actually allocated enough time that we believe to be able to answer these questions as thoroughly as possible, because we understand how important it is that you begin to make decisions about leadership, board governance specifically for your organizations. And as we transition from today's session and get prepared for the last session in this series, which is next Wednesday, we're going to tie in session 1 and session 2. And we are going to talk about how to develop high impact board structures and evaluate board effectiveness. That's one thing that we really don't talk about within the sector when we have these conversations about boards. It's typically, I don't know what they're supposed to do. I don't know how to find the right people. But we also have to have conversations on how do boards evaluate whether or not they are efficient and effective in the work that they're doing. And so next week, we'll have a number of templates that'll be available to you so you can go from conversations and learning over these 3 sessions and then go right into action with your boards and your board representatives. But I don't want to take too much time talking about the past, what we've done and where we're going. I want to concentrate in the now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to my friends, Krista, John, and Pam over at Board Build. Krista, I know that I'm flipping it over to you. So you all, just thank you for joining me in this process. And I am so excited because I know about all the amazing work that you're doing in the region, and I want other people to know about it too. So I'm going to go on mute. I'm going to take notes, and I'm going to go off camera, and I'm going to turn it over to the Board Build team. Just thank you all so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Kim. Thank you to all for joining us today. It's an honor to be here to discuss engaging your board. So this afternoon, we're going to talk about how to engage and manage your board for mission success. Before we dive into it too far, I want to take the opportunity to introduce our team. So first, we've got Pam Cannell. She's the CEO and president of Board Build. You can see her up there waving. We also have Mr. John Hernandez. He is the director of strategy. And then my name is Krista Johnson. I'm director of communication and training for Board Build. And again, thank you so much for having us. If you'll advance the slide, we will talk about the vision and mission. Okay, so what we want you to know about Board Build is about our heart and why we're here, but an overarching just summary about Board Build. So Board Build is a Texas-based nonprofit organization. We leverage online self-paced training, and we prepare emerging and established leaders to effectively serve on nonprofit boards. So we do that, we prepare leaders, and then we also, using an algorithm-based matching system, we align individuals with personal skills and interests with the actual needs of nonprofit boards. And we teach nonprofit organizations to govern with equity. We also help corporations upskill team members, and we also help corporations retain high potential team members and further their corporate responsibility efforts. So very important just to know that that really is our mission. And back to our vision as well, we envision a world where diverse, trained leaders are able to connect flawlessly with organizations just like yours to unite and really create an opportunity for communities to work, play, and grow and be strengthened together. So the plan today, what the agenda is, we'll provide context for your board members. We'll also discuss how to invest in your board members and to really build that relationship, the importance of creating an intentional leadership pipeline. We'll also set some ground rules for curiosity and how to really cultivate that curiosity. We'll review some important resources, and then, as Kim shared, we'll set some time aside to do Q&A. Speaking of resources, this is an opportunity for you to pull out your device if you've got your smartphone handy and scan this QR code that you have on the screen here. If you have an Apple device, you'll simply open up your camera application, hover it over, and it should pop up a link that you can select. If you have an Android device, do the same. Try that first. Pull up your camera, hover over, and then you'll see that link pop up that you can select. If for some reason you're having a hard time with Android, you can also open up the Google Lens app on your phone and scan that there. Never fear though, if you have a hard time doing this, you can drop your email in the chat. You can just give me a quick private message and I'll make sure to get this sent over to you after. And if we are moving too fast and you don't have the opportunity to scan this, there'll be another opportunity later in the presentation for you to do so. Okay, so it's time to turn it over to the team to go on to the next section.
Thanks so much, Krista. Appreciate it. And James and Kimberly, we are just so pleased to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to present and to talk a little bit about, as Kimberly said, we want to provide you the opportunity to have that best fit with your board members, and that best fit then will set you up for success to have an engaged board. And so we'd like to cover all of that, beginning with that recruitment process. And as both Krista and Kimberly indicated, Board Build is a source of trained and diverse leaders to identify potential board members. So keep that in mind as we go through this. But we see in the recruitment process that first step in success is to level set the expectations in your board prospectus. So say someone reaches out to you and says, I'm interested in serving on your board, or maybe you have identified someone through the Board Build pipeline once you've posted at no cost a board opening on Board Build, you've gone through the list of potential candidates and you want to reach out to them. So however you've identified potential candidates to serve on your board, you want all those expectations lined out in the board prospectus. From that, we want to talk about board orientation, that unique value proposition that you offer to the community, and then that organizational history. So as I mentioned, that board prospectus is key and your first step. And what you will include in a board prospectus, and if you've already scanned that QR code, one of the first resource you'll see in that is Board Build's board prospectus, provided to you for an opportunity just to see an example and how you might set that up for yourself. So included in the board prospectus for the purpose of setting expectations and making sure that potential board candidate can determine if this is a best fit for them, is a letter from your board or nominating chair, a statement of your board nominating priorities, and that's coming out of that gap analysis that Kimberly discussed last week. What are those priorities that you're looking for? What are you striving towards in the next 12, 24 months that you need that particular expertise or skill set at the table? What are your qualifications for asking someone to be a board member? In particular, Board Build requires that all of their board members be trained in the essentials of nonprofit board governance. We feel that if someone is trained, then they're not going to recede into that observation mode for the first 6 months. They're going to have those skills to be able to make a difference on day one. Within that board prospectus, of course, is your mission, your vision, and your values. Again, you want to make sure that your values align with that particular board candidate, and it's going to be a good fit. You'll list out the roles and responsibilities of a board member. And then really important, again, that act of inclusion is set out from the beginning when those meeting times are and what the overall time commitment is, so everybody's expectations are on the same page. So once you have issued the invitation and that new candidate has been added to your board, voted in, you will have a board orientation. And again, one more time to level set expectations so everybody's on the same page and can engage from the beginning. That board orientation is a great opportunity to invite other board members, current board members to the table. So again, that active inclusion, you're making sure that everybody, before they get to that first board meeting and have a seat at the table, that they've seen that someone's face and they're able to put faces and names together. You will again go over your vision, mission, and values, since all decisions will be filtered through these items, through the vision, mission, and values, through these core documents. Leadership, you will want to introduce either personally or at least by reference the board leadership and the staff leadership, and you'll have all the governing documents available to them, maybe through a link to a board portal or to a Google Drive, a shared drive somehow. But the governing documents to include bylaws, budget, minutes, financial statements, the conflict of interest policy and the form that they'll sign, and the board member agreement. That is another resource that's in that link that Krista shared with you. The board member agreement will be signed on an annual basis. Program descriptions, your board calendar, your committee list, and the strategic plan. These are all documents that will help drive the new board members' understanding of their roles and responsibilities on the board. You also want to share your unique value proposition. What sets you apart from the other 10,000 nonprofits in North Texas? Presumably you have this in your marketing strategy. Share it with your board members so that they can tell your story. And that story is going to be inspirational. So maybe you consider sharing testimonials at the very beginning with board members so they understand and are inspired by the mission and why they join your board. And then how is your business model innovative, especially post-pandemic when there's so much change going on and the opportunity to have different revenue sources coming into your organization for financial sustainability? How are you innovative in this new environment? And how are you addressing systems change? What are you doing in the way of upstream work? So yes, those direct needs services are so important right now, but really we as an industry, as a social sector, we want to put ourselves out of business. So what are we doing to making sure that we are doing upstream work? And then within that board orientation, you want to include the organizational history. You want to make sure that, again, that your board members can tell the story. In fact, I've had board members who've been on board for the past couple of years, and they just expressed to me, I'm not sure what our elevator pitch is. And I thought, oh my goodness, that is something I need to put in writing and get out to everyone if they don't know what the elevator pitch is, and we've not equipped them as much as we need to. So put down those milestones, let them know who those key leaders were in the development of the organization. Give insight into the growth, and that could be a few down years, but they need to understand and know the growth trajectory of the organization. And then most importantly, what is the impact that you are making in the community? And that's not just those outputs and how many bags of groceries you've given out, but that's that true impact. How have you made a difference in someone's life, potentially by providing them the basic needs so then that they can go in and be successful in their profession or in the home. So it's really important that you measure impact. At this point, I'm going to throw it over to John to talk about investing in your board members.
Hello, everyone. John Hernandez here. I'm the good-looking guy on the pictures from before. So happy to be here. Miss Kimberly, I can't tell you how much you've helped us spread our wings in Dallas, and then this opportunity on top of that, we couldn't thank you enough. But let me jump into this, and I'm excited about this topic in particular because I've been a part of boards, I've run boards, both in the startup phase, through the medium, and even some of these larger boards. And I can tell you that investing in your board members is critical going forward. And so when I look at our board of directors, that's really, and when you look at your board of directors, you really need to think of this is your command center. This is where good and bad ideas go to get cultivated, approved, declined, and everything in between that's going to help you set your organization apart. And so this is very important when you go to invest in your board members, that you're not only selecting the right folks, but the right folks past the financial piece. And I know we're going to touch on this a little bit later, but really what we're going to talk about real quick in this section is how do you prepare your board? I can tell you right now that still to this day, or I should say, when I started serving 20 years ago, I had no idea what I was doing other than to show up once a month. And unfortunately, that's still around today. Today, the majority of board of directors still have no clue what they're supposed to be doing other than following their passion and serving their community. So we're going to talk about how we can prepare your board of directors. We're going to talk about establishing feedback mechanisms, the importance of retreats. I know that sometimes I think people associate retreats with, hey, let's go have a few cocktails, but I'm going to touch on why that's so important. And then the discussion piece, right? This touches a little bit about the inclusion, but I can tell you going forward, again, the better you prepare your team, and your board of directors are part of your very essential team, the better your organization is going to be able to move forward. So if we go to the next slide, this is the core of what we do on how to train our candidates and ultimately our graduates. And then this is what we feel comfortable in putting them out and matching them with qualified nonprofits. As you can see, we talk about the board essentials, but we talk about everything about from logistics to operations to financials to how to evaluate a CEO. I mean, these are things that you want your new board of directors, and quite frankly, even your existing board of directors need to know, because that's where the rubber hits the road, right? Those are where the decisions are made. Our training is really made up of, it's an online training. It's made up of 7 different modules, 22 different topics. And really what we're really trying to do is make this very easy and helpful to follow. But this is self-paced. So if you were to sit down in one sitting and try to attack this entire training, it's probably about a 4-hour training, but most, because of life, people will bite it off in 15 to 30 minutes, sometimes an hour. And so I would think on average, it would take someone about a month and a half to get through the entire training. And then they're certified and ready to go, armed and ready to get matched. And so when we talk about certifying and qualifying our board of directors, just know that when you come to our platform, they have gone through the training. We have expressed to them that passion comes first, then comes their experience, professional experience or personal experience. But then it's time to go to work. And especially for us that have been in that startup phase, we do not have time for board of directors that want to sit on our board for a year and just kind of listen to the reports. We need hands-on. And so let's go to the next slide. Let's talk about mechanisms. So mechanisms are really just checking in with your board. I know when I first started my first nonprofit, really the biggest issue or the hump that I had to get over is really engaging my board. In fact, I was very lucky that I had a few board members going, John, I still don't understand what you need us to do, right? And so these mechanisms, these pulse checks, these board evaluations, these scorecards, not only help you keep track of the engagement from your board, but it really helps you get centered as an executive director and as a staff to go, hey, our board is feeling this kind of way. How can we more engage them? Or what information are they screaming for? As Pam alluded to earlier, if you don't know our value proposition, that's a real problem. But sometimes, as you all know, when you're in a startup phase or if you're in the weeds, I mean, you're so focused on making that impact that sometimes you kind of forget about your board until you're preparing for that board meeting. And so these mechanisms help you, if nothing else, get a good gauge of what your board is thinking and performing. Let's go to the next. The board retreat. Again, I heard a great mentor tell me, people cannot truly work together effectively until you know who you're working with, right? So every single board of director has been selected for one reason or the other. But now, how do we bring that team together? How do you get that primary focus? Now, everybody can read the mission and the vision, and we can talk to the staff about what's being done daily. But what can we do as a board? And who has the strengths and weaknesses? Just how you would evaluate some of your staff members, board of directors need to evaluate who they're working with on a board. And so this retreat gives you that very valuable time together where you can collaborate, where you can engage in team building, where you can get envisioning exercises. Again, this is the place where good and bad ideas, and quite frankly, sometimes for the most part, there are more bad ideas than there are good. And so this is where you flush all that out, right? And you give people permission to speak up and say just that. So let's talk about the next discussion. This is where it talks about really setting the tone and letting your board, giving them permission, so to speak, to say, look, I need you to speak up. Again, EDs get in this tunnel vision where everything sounds really good. Why? Because you thought of it. Until you pitch it to your board and you're like, that doesn't quite make sense. Or no, if I'm somebody looking in from the outside, that doesn't apply to me. That doesn't resonate with me. And so you have to give these discussions open, some of these open forums. So you have to inform them. You have to give them and invite the industry experts to come in and share I'll give you a perfect example. I serve on a board. We brought in some of our, not only our team members, but basically these were social workers that come in and do our work in Fort Worth ISDs. So we thought we were, as a board, we thought we were going to listen to stories about how they were helping kids. In reality, what they shared with us are all the things that they have to do just to get to their job, meaning they're feeding kids, they're talking to kids about paying rent, they're talking about real life stuff, even before they can even start doing the social work that they were hired to do. So sometimes as a board, we need that feedback from our shareholders, from our clients, from our end users, and then we invite them to give their testimonies to our board. That's where I feel most of your board is really going to get a really clear picture of not only what we do, but as Pam alluded to earlier, what is the true impact? And can that impact be improved by quite frankly, just making some very easy adjustments? And so I say all that these discussions are very important. And I know especially as a new ED, you try to almost give your board too much respect. I want to respect their time. I want to respect their profession. But in reality, they signed up for a reason, and underutilizing your board could really lead to board directors stepping out or checking out because you're really not getting them plugged in early and often. So I'm going to hand this back over. I think that's my last slide.
Yep, that's your last one. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
All right, the next section is about creating an intentional leadership pipeline. So this section, we want to talk about how effective boards, they really attend to the well-being of the board as a whole, and they cultivate the sense of inclusiveness. And we think that this is done through 4 specific ways. Of course, there are many other ways, but we want to highlight 4. First of all, through recruiting and establishing and connecting and matching with diverse pipeline of talent, because we know that the diversity drives organizational performance. Establishing a mentorship program specifically for new board members. And then a sneaky best practice that we'll talk about later is creating term limits. And then finally, developing and clearly communicating organizational goals. So we'll dive into each one of these and give a little bit more detail. First, I think we all can agree, you're here, we're talking about this, so I'm sure that you know this and believe that diversity drives organizational performance. And the data, it's not hard to find the data. The business case for board diversity is everywhere if you do a simple Google. And we know that this leads to new and fresh perspectives and decision making. Pam, whenever I first started working with Board Build, Pam would say, we are looking for new solutions to old problems. And that is what diversity on boards does. It tends to bring more innovative thinking, more interesting and creative solutions to maybe older problems. And last but certainly not least, it definitely extends the reach of organizational networks. You know, when we can diversify the lived experience of our boards, when we can diversify race, gender, ability, we are also diversifying the connection to people that we have outside of maybe our circle that we've known to come to know and trust and work with. So this gives us access to more donors, potentially, to more sources of income and revenue. And we believe that Board Build is the innovative solution to helping nonprofit organizations like yours build that diverse talent pipeline. And like John shared earlier, we do this through a few different ways. Next slide, please. It's through our matching technology. So we have an algorithm-based matching system, and it takes those trained individuals that we just spoke about that have completed our certification program. It matches those individuals with the organizations who are seeking their specific skills, lived experiences, expertise, and many other things. And they're optimally paired together. So this algorithm, we think, is a really exciting aspect of the technology. And sometimes we'll refer to it as the Match.com or maybe the Tinder or the Bumble of the professional world. So we're bringing people together that really need to meet and they have a common interest and shared goals. The plan for success. So earlier, Pam mentioned that this is completely free for nonprofit organizations. This is our gift to the community. We want to allow nonprofit organizations to post any and all open board or committee positions. And this allows us to have the listings that we need to ensure that we're connecting the individuals with. We need those, the diversity of even just different opportunities for our individuals to engage with. These are the steps. There's 5 specific steps to starting the profile and then completing it and matching. So first being creating the profile, that's pretty simple. Next is posting open board positions. The third is then going back into the platform and reviewing the list of qualified applicants. So you'll be served up a list once you go back in, and you'll see the different things that these applicants are passionate about. You can see their background and their expertise, and they will have indicated that they are looking for an organization very similar to yours. So it's a great way, again, that match.com, to connect. Number 4, sharing the nonprofit's mission, vision, and values with the applicant. So you'll have the opportunity to interview, to get together, and you can really share what you have to offer the community and also to this applicant in this board position. And this is a great time to go back and share those board member duties and requirements, just so they're aware if there's give get or whatever that policy is that you would like them to follow as a potential board member. And then finally, you invite the applicant when you found that perfect match, you invite them to serve on the board, and then you can add them to your board within the platform. So those 5 simple steps is how you would start from the beginning of creating your profile to the end of matching. Okay, so now let's pretend you've matched with the perfect candidate. You've got them on your board is up and running, as it is, I'm sure, with all of you now, and it's time to establish a board mentor program. I can think back probably to grade school, being that young kid that's coming into an environment, a new class. We moved around a lot when I was little, or even trying to find a spot to sit at the lunch table. And I think it is a common human experience that when you come into a new environment, wanting to feel some sort of safety and security. And the board member program, I believe, allows that board member to enter and to feel more comfortable from day one. And then they could really share their unique gifts. You can get all the awkward nerves out of the way. So they have a safe place. They can ask questions to that board mentor. It's a great way to have systematic leadership development and knowing that these maybe newer board members are getting the opportunity to develop those skills. And it also encourages individual skill development as well. Okay, the sneaky thing that we mentioned earlier, or slick, I guess is a better way. It's not as sneaky, but introducing term limits will ensure that you've got that fresh perspective, the new, maybe objective perspectives of just different people coming in and out of the board. This also points back to something else we talked about earlier, expanding the network, expanding the reach. It'll include new people lead to new ideas and new networks. I think it's pretty simple that way. And if there is that person that doesn't really want to be involved, or maybe they've just been on the board for a long time, it's an easy way to let them know this is no longer their journey in a nice way. So it's not as confrontational, I guess. And then finally, developing and clearly communicating these organizational goals that you have. So this collective ability to, first of all, establish annual goals and establishing a review process and progress on a regular basis. And we think that dashboards are a great visual tool for this. Sometimes this data can become, or the progress to goal can sometimes become a little stale if you see it in just an Excel spreadsheet. So we really encourage you to develop a dashboard or create some visual tools, maybe even just a PowerPoint deck, but allowing people to see data visualization in a way that helps them retain it. Setting strategic board agendas. A big aha for some people is moving the committee reports to the consent agenda. So this allows the time that you are in meeting to be very focused on the items that need to be discussed, that are a little bit more pressing. And if it's just something that board members can review before in the reports, you can get the approval on the consent agenda and then just move right into the meeting. And as always, in any type of leadership or management role, just leading with appreciation and celebrating wins. We know that this will encourage the behaviors that you want to see. And it's all about just highlighting those behaviors so that we will encourage and continue to contribute positively in those ways. Okay, I think this is Pam.
It's actually me, I think.
Just kidding, it's John.
Yes, we have to mix it up a little bit. So setting ground rules and cultivating curiosity. And I know it says right there, it says they raise doubts, they explore trade-offs and encourage differences of opinion. And quite frankly, especially when you're talking about new board of directors, the old adage is you sit on a board for about a year and try to figure out where you're going to plug in or speak up. But even some of our very dynamic, you're going to hear millennials a lot, but we're very lucky. We have a different audience and we have a different leader out there that wants to get plugged in day one. And if they get shut down early, you could shut them down for good. And so we really want to encourage that open conversation. Again, I know I mentioned this before, but especially in this time, I hope we're coming out of COVID, but it seemed like there for 2 years, I've heard from some nonprofits that says, look, John, I've pivoted so much, I've gone in circles, right? It seems like every month there's a new initiative with a new issue or a new challenge. And so these conversations become a very vital part to your daily practice, not only for the direction of the organization, but for the for the EDs out there, for the CEOs, and even for your staff. These challenges can be overwhelming, especially when capacity issues come into play. And so let's talk about, consult outsiders and seek different viewpoints, recruit and assign a devil's advocate, which can be a little bit hairy sometimes, but believe me when I tell you, most of the time you come out of there with some great solutions. And develop a contingency plan. Again, when we live in a world where we're pivoting so much, we're basically spinning in circles, these contingency plans come in handy. So let's go to the next slide. So we have to set the ground rules, right? And some of these are very common sense, but as I see some training modules that said, look, we're not going to give you anything that's out of the blue. A lot of this is common sense, but sometimes it's just not easy. But when you set that ground rule and go, hey, we need to respect each other here. Let's set an environment of respect. We set an environment of open to others and opinions. Keep an open mind. Stay objective, right? Don't make it personal. I know, especially if you're very passionate about a subject or an initiative or a program, things can come off a little defensive, and some people take it a little personal. And really, I like to always quote Miss Pam about this, but when she says there is no margin, no mission, and if you don't want to make it that fancy, no money, no honey, you have to think outside of the box, and that means you're having to be open to different solutions. So you focus on the solution and not the problem, and then let's not get bogged down in the details. I don't really have a problem with that because I like to stay big picture, but you can really just go analysis and the paralysis, and then walk out of a 3-hour meeting with literally more lost than when you entered it. So again, let's open it up and let's listen to everyone and let's come up with a solution, and let's keep it out of the personal space. Let's go to the next slide. A devil's advocate. I didn't even know Pam was doing this until later on, but I was like, why are they always taking the opposite approach? And quite frankly, like I said, at the end of the day, if nothing else, it gave others permission, because usually if one thinks of an obstacle or a challenge on an initiative or a program, usually there's another handful of others that were thinking the exact same thing but didn't want to speak up. And so sometimes this devil's advocate not only helps initiate a great hearty conversation, but it allows others to kind of chime in and not so feel alone in their thought process. And so let's go to the next one. The contingency plan, right? And whenever I think about A, B, and C, I think about when I first became a CEO, I hired a speech coach, and he told me, he says, John, there's going to be a speech that you plan for in your head. There's going to be a speech that also in your head that you're going to go, okay, I'm going to crash and burn. And then there's the actual speech, somewhere in between, right? And so A, B, and C, that's the most likely case. But as an ED or a head of a nonprofit, you have to think of it all. But you don't have to be alone. This is where your board comes in and says, look, this is the good, bad, and the ugly. Most likely it's not going to be that bad, but if we're all in it together, we can get through this, right? So it's engaging all your board members in the sustainability of the organization. Again, I think I mentioned this to you before. The more involved and included your board members are, the more likely you're able to really overcome some of these obstacles. And quite frankly, it's just kind of like a relationship when you go through a little rough patch. When you come out the other end, you're stronger, better, and it usually brings cohesiveness to the organization. So that's my spiel. I know I can speak forever. Ms. Pam?
Great. Thanks so much, John. So what we want to leave you with is that the thought that the biggest driver for nonprofit board recruitment is passion. People are going to love the mission, then they're going to get on board with you. But once they're on board, they've got to enjoy their time with you. And if they get bored or they're not engaged, you're going to lose them. So that's the biggest driver for a nonprofit board retention is enjoyment. So make it fun. John, I think that's something we didn't put in here. We didn't say make it fun.
That's right.
So consider making it fun, the whole experience fun as well. We did want to mention at the end, of course, we told you a little bit about the products and services that we offer right now. That would include the Essentials of Nonprofit Board Governance Training. That gives you the opportunity to make sure that any board member you bring on board is level setted, as well as we can send your entire board through the Essentials of Training. And then we provide you the opportunity to list your open board and committee positions on Board Build. Just go to boardbuild.org and if you can click where it says post position, and you'll post open board and committee positions there. In addition, beginning in April, we will be launching our next product, which is the Governance with Equity module. It's DEI training specific to nonprofit boards. We know there's plenty of DEI training out there for staff and management. There's nothing that's online on-demand training specific to board governance. And this is a robust and really meaty course that offers you everything from determining if your organization is ready for this journey, helping you get to that point, the assessments that you can do to determine where you are to benchmark progress in the future. We're going to level set vocabulary for your board and then take that into the implementation stage. How can we help you implement your DEI committee and policies into your organization? So look for more information on that beginning in April. And again, we wanted to give you one more opportunity to scan those resources. We know that everything we mentioned is not included in here. Feel free to reach out to us. And we'll again provide contact information at the end of this webinar, but wanted to give you one more opportunity to scan and pull some of the resources that we provided for you. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back to Kimberly, and she will take it from here.
Wonderful. I am coming back on. I'm putting my glasses back on so I can see everybody on the screen. This was fantastic, and we are only halfway through, right? So there was some conversations. We have some really great questions that I'm going to save towards the end of the fireside chat, because we're just going to have now an organic conversation to help fill in some gaps for questions that people might have. But there was one question I actually do want to bring up before we get started. Pam, you mentioned earlier, and I retyped it in the chat, that we need to focus on doing the upstream work.
Right.
And there was a question in the Q&A that asked, what is upstream work? And I wanted you to be able to answer it from your perspective, because I think it would just help those that, you know, sometimes we get stuck on a piece and we just want that clear, and then everything else opens up. So I wanted to start off with that. And ask you, can you explain when you say upstream work, what exactly is that?
That's beautiful. That is a fantastic question, and it really is the core of the work that we're doing. And as I mentioned, there are thousands of nonprofits in North Texas, but we need to make sure that we're making an impact and we're doing good work. So yes, it is great to have the bags of groceries available for that long line of cars that need help right now. But what are we doing to reduce that line of cars? That's where it is. So Kimberly, you've probably heard this example, and I know it's one that kind of shocked me at first when I heard it, but because it shocked me, it stays in my mind. So a couple of people were standing on the side of a river and they saw this child come floating down the river. And one person said, "Oh my gosh, I got to go in and pull this child out. They're going to drown." And then another child came down and another child, and the other person said, I need to run. I need to go figure out where these are coming from. He said, "No, you can't leave me," the person in the water. He said, "No, I need to go upstream to figure out why children are falling in the water and potentially drowning." So that's what we mean by upstream work. Yes, we need to do that direct service needs, but what are we doing to try to solve the overall problem? Kimberly, do you have anything else to add to that?
I do, because this is actually a recent conversation that I've been having with people that I've been training. You know, a lot of the work, the good work that we do, at the end of the day, Pam, you also mentioned this, and I often say it, we should be working where we're putting ourselves out of business. If we're really focused on the true charitable nature of why we are creating nonprofits, we should be working from that point. It's not about us, even if we're the founder, right? Or the top leader. But I think nonprofits also have to remember, when we're trying to do that upstream work, it's what do we need to do to put the immediate Band-Aid on? So let me get this line down.
Right.
But what do I also need to do to eradicate this issue? And sometimes that comes from policy, right? And policy changes, and nonprofit leaders often forget that they can do policy and advocacy work within limits, and that's something you need to check with your legal teams with. But at the end of the day, we need to put the Band-Aid on because our community needs us in that most immediate moment. But the goal should be, we're putting ourselves out of a job. So what does that really need to do in the long? We're doing short-term work, but what can we do long-term? Because it might be something so slight. And it might be something that our boards can help to really leverage their social capital to help us with things like that. So that's what I would add to that is, let's look at the total picture, not just the Band-Aid. But I think utilizing the terms, I'm going to have to start writing. And I heard Pam say upstream work, because I think it just flips perspective and in the conversation, and helps to set the tone a lot differently. So I want to jump into some questions. Go ahead. Were you going to say something else?
Yeah, it was, because I noticed something else that was running through the chat was systems change. And I just wanted to touch on that, because that is what we're talking about. And that was one of the reasons why Board Build was even started, is because we looked at the lack of diversity on boards and we thought, you know what? And we looked at the data, and 90%, at the time we started Board Build, 90% of board members were Caucasian males. And it's like, well, if we keep reaching out to the people we know within our own networks that look like us and bring them to the boards, we're never going to change this. We need systems change. And so that's why Board Build was created, to provide a pipeline of trained and diverse leaders. So we need to be thinking, as John said, at that higher level, that systems change level.
And it's so important what you just said, because I often say, when we're looking at our board members and the communities that we're serving, or the initiatives that we're working towards, and we are not connecting with people that can connect to the community, that understand the community in the most organic way, are we truly working on the right solutions and moving from a leadership and a governance perspective, and making decisions that really are in the best interest of the organization and the people that we serve? Are we making decisions based on what we think should happen? And so in order for us to really work on these, and I always say honor the integrity and the culturally relevant pieces, regardless of who it is within the groups that we're serving and the areas that we're serving, that we have to sometimes get really granular with the people that we're selecting. And that actually brings up a second question, since I mentioned that. In the chat, someone asked about your algorithms. And I want to bring it up so I can ask it exactly how it is stated. It says, I'd like to learn more about the matching algorithm. What is included, and is it specific to the organization's needs and profile?
Chris, I'm going to throw that to you because I'm going
Yes,
to answer that.
it's still magic to me.
Okay, awesome. So yes, it is very specific to the individual organization. That's the quick answer. The long answer is, when you're setting up your profile, you get to say specifically what you are looking for when you're doing that position listing. So you get to say, the example often that Pam will use is, let's say that we have a community, we have a nonprofit that is serving a Hispanic population, and you really want an accountant who is a female, who is Hispanic, to sit on that board to help with the needs and what we're looking to do here with systems change. So you can say that. I mean, you can get that specific on your position listing. And that is really how we know, and why we also refer to it as a match.com, is because when you know who you are and you know what you're looking for, you can attract that specific thing. So get really clear in that position listing. You can select everything that you are looking for to find that best match. So the algorithm is pretty simple. It just, in the back end, it's the person, individual. When we put our profile together, we say what we're interested in. We can opt in and share our diversity labels if we feel comfortable doing that. And then from there, that links us up with a nonprofit that's looking for us specifically.
This is so powerful, because so many organizations, regardless of size, regardless of years of experience or in existence based on the 501c3 status, struggle with this part right here, right? And so to have this type of resource in North Texas is honestly like magic. It honestly, to know that there's a resource that people, if I'm interested in being trained, that I can be trained and not be affiliated with a board. It's so great to know that organizations that have board members that may not be as seasoned or experienced can also take advantage of something like this. And then to know that when my social capital might not be as rich and dynamic as I need it to be to meet the vision of this organization. And so to know that there's also now this growing network of individuals that have been trained that we can potentially be matched with is something that, talk about going upstream. We know we need board members, and I can introduce you to a whole lot of people. But what I can't do is to sit down with everyone that I meet individually and be able to match them with right people that have already been trained and they understand the level of commitment and responsibility that it takes to really join a board. And I'm just grateful as a nonprofit consultant. I'm just grateful that something like this exists in the community, because it can take off one additional pressure from governance leaders on how do we fill our next positions, and they can concentrate on some other things that may require more of the human capital intellect that the organization has. So I want to swing a question to you, John.
Oh,
Many new board members are managers in their profession and quite comfortable managing people.
yeah.
So can you help clarify the line between management and oversight?
Yeah, and that's honestly, even in my dealings in running a chamber and running boards, that's where a lot of the rub happened, especially in our board meetings. Because I think as a board of director, initially you come in and say, well, this is how I run my organization, and this is what we're going to do. And so you get into this management mode. And I think what we tend to forget, and especially if you're not setting the ground rules up front, as we spoke about earlier, that you're in an advisory role. As a board of director, you're here to advise the executive director and sometimes the staff on the trajectory of the organization, and that we're on the right path and that we're adhering to the mission and the vision of the organization. but I'm not here to meddle in operations in the day-to-day necessarily. And sometimes that's a hard disconnect, especially if you're in the weeds with your staff and your executive director, right? And so sometimes we need to come in as a board of director and say, look, I'm switching hats. I may be a manager or a director at work, but I'm coming over to this organization and trying to see what resources I can bring to help guide and direct this organization on the right path. And so we try to really set those parameters, because I think that's where, especially, you know, if you're not in the weeds, I can speak to this as a former ED. You know, sometimes you do look at your board and go, you're not here every day. You don't know what we have to deal with when we're handing out these groceries, right? And so for you to come in and tell me how I'm supposed to do my job, sometimes people can take it personal. Again, things that we spoke about earlier. But I think as a board, if you could set that guide and say, look, you're here to help us keep our ship pointed in the right direction, not necessarily tell us how to manage the ship. So I hope that answers the question.
It does. It really does, because it kind of reinforces your response reinforces that this is a collaborative relationship with distinct responsibilities, and that the administrative team as well as the board governance team have to operate in their zones of legal genius and responsibility. Right? To help, because these lines get so blurred, and we often hear so many times that EDs are running boards, right? But they're serving as EDs. And a lot of times they don't realize the legal liabilities associated with that, right? We want to keep things going, but that is not your responsibility. I always, as a political science professor, I always say Congress is Congress and the president is the president.
Yes.
And the president cannot do congressional work and Congress can't do presidential work.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason why there's a different type of checks and balances. And if Congress started doing presidential work, we would be in a lot of trouble, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
And so your answer was targeted and spot on, because we do need to have these more open dialogue and conversations about these responsibilities. So I appreciate that. And Krista, my next question is for you, but before I ask it, one of the things I made a note, one of the statements that you made was around consent agendas. And I think some of our, I'm not going to make an assumption that everybody knows what a consent agenda is. So before I ask my question, can you just explain what a consent agenda is as you were discussing preparing for board meetings and moving things to the consent agenda? What does that really mean?
Yes. Okay. So I'll share my point of view, and then of course I'll look for Pam to add in any gaps that I might need filled. So the consent agenda allows any notes from the committees, maybe the committee meetings that need to be reported out. We can move that information to the consent agenda. In addition, there can be minutes from the previous meeting that can be included in the consent agenda. Anything that the board members can read prior that doesn't really require a significant amount of conversation. When that consent agenda is brought forth at the very beginning of the meeting, the chair will then say, you know, do I have approval on the consent agenda? Are there any questions, any disapproval, and can we move forward? And by saying, okay, we all agree on the consent agenda, we're able to say we've all read this, we agree, and now we can focus on the topics that must be discussed in today's meeting. So I've been able to participate in a few board meetings with different organizations, and I found the board built consent agenda to be the most robust. And it also puts some responsibility on the board member or the staff or whoever to really prep prior to the meeting. And I appreciate that, because I feel like I am more prepared and the board members are more prepared when they read through the pre-reads and the consent agenda. But Pam, anything that I missed?
Yeah, I just think, and it goes back to what John was talking about. We have brought leaders to this board. They're not management level anymore. They're leaders. They're thinking about strategy and moving in a forward direction and a sustainable direction for the organization. And so we want those conversations to be strategic at a high level. And I have to say, if I sit in on a board meeting and it's just one committee report after another, I am bored. I am checked out. I'm out of here. And really, if this goes on for too long, I'm off that board. I need to be challenged with a strategic, generative conversation. And so that is the tool. Now, anything that's on the consent agenda that needs to come off, and we just did this at our last board meeting. You might remember, John and Krista, there was a problem with the minutes. I yanked that, we started the meeting. I said, they opened up the vote for the consent agenda. I said the minutes need to come off. And then with that noted in that meeting's minutes, then we can move forward with approval of the consent agenda. So just keep that in mind. Anything can be taken off the consent agenda, but it's just, yes, it's a little bit of extra work for the executive director when they're setting up the agenda with the board chair to get all of that information in there, but it just saves time and it provides opportunity for those strategic conversations.
Absolutely. And for those of you that may have heard the term but are not sure how it was in play, for those of you, especially in North Texas, when it comes to your city council meetings, you will hear consent agenda used over and over and over again. And that honestly, the practice of a consent agenda honestly does force board members to be a lot more prepared. Because they're reading ahead of time. And on the government side is if I don't have any questions about something, and that's unanimous, it typically goes to the consent agenda because it's really nothing for us to talk about in the general public. And so it's a way, as Pam said, of facilitating more strategic conversations and honestly just running meetings more effectively. And we'll talk about that a little bit more next week as well. So Krista, my question for you then is for new board members. They can be eager to make a difference and do good. What advice do you have for both EDs and staff when a board member reaches out directly to a staff member for help with a project or to bounce an idea off you? And actually this situation actually just came up. I just thought about it and someone that asked me the other day, but what do you say to that?
Well, fun fact, it comes up for me all the time. So that's why I'm qualified to speak on this one. It really comes down to exactly the question that you asked. The new board members are so excited. Maybe this is their first board, or maybe they're just an emerging leader on a board and they haven't had the opportunity to kind of figure out how it works, how they talk to the ED, do they sit on a committee? And I get emails from them and they're so excited. They share feedback, they share ideas. Sometimes they give me tasks. And the first thing I do now is I go, after being coached by Pam, I go directly to Pam. So I will say, Pam, I'm being asked to do this. What do you think? I also loop us all in together in a conversation. So I will thank them so much. Thank the board member for trusting me or for sharing the idea with me. I think that's really important for me to cultivate that relationship. And then we all get into a conversation about it. If it's something that Pam, as CEO, President, ED, feels like Krista, Director, Communications and Training, should focus my time on, then I am reporting directly to Pam and she's sharing that workload for me. So I think it can become tricky when you have so many bosses if you're not careful. So I would say, as nonprofit EDs, just protect your staff, ensure that you're keeping that communication line open and you know that they're telling you, or your expectation is that they tell you if the board reaches out, and then just managing expectations with the board so they know that really the ED is the first line of contact. But to me, it's also, I take it as a compliment that they trust me, that they feel like they can talk to me. So I think it's double-edged. You just have to work your way through it with nuance.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Pam, board member time is extremely valuable, right? We get great people, and sometimes great people have very limited time. And so can a board member trade their time, their volunteer time, given to the organization for a company sponsorship?
I like that scenario. That's because it brings up a number of different thoughts. And yeah, it's really tempting to say, sure, yeah, we're happy to support you that way. But we're setting up a problem with our duty of loyalty. And that's one of the duties that we have as a board member, is to be loyal to that organization and make sure that we are working at all times to 100% support of that organization. And if you set up a conflict, and it's a slippery slope that you're setting up if you trade a board member's time for anything. And so I would recommend that if a board member comes to you with anything less than 100% altruistic support of the organization, you need to back away from that situation pretty quickly.
And I totally agree with you, because the fiduciary responsibility, and for those of you that were with us last week, we talked about that, and we also talked about the duty of loyalty. And so it is so important that we don't set the tone so that we begin to see deviations, because once you start it with one, it becomes the standard practice for everyone.
Right.
And then you have to try to figure out how to get order back on the board. So thank you for that. John, who do we need on our board? Who should, because that is the question.
Yes.
Right? I want the right board, but who do we need on our boards?
Yeah, well, let me first start by, I'm gonna apologize up front because I'm pretty passionate about this section. And so please excuse the bluntness, but in reality, you know, we need to get outside of our bubble, and we're all, you know, aware that we all do this. I did this at the Hispanic Chamber when I was president. When it was time to bring on new board members, what do? You go to your boards and your friends, right? And you go, who do we know? Who do we like? Who do we want to bring on? And then a lot of times you get enamored, you get these stars in the eyes by these big corporate names to go, now these multi-million-dollar contracts are going to come from the sky. And it doesn't, by the way. I'm just going to share that with you. But in reality, we need to dig deep as a board and as an ED and to go, where are our gaps on our board? What do we need to move our mission forward? And be honest about it, right? But you know, when it comes to diversity, and as the Hispanic Chamber president, I addressed this almost every single day. Nonprofit boards were looking at, and even corporates were going, I need diversity. And I'm like, okay, so that's reason number one. Now you need to support that. Why do you need diversity? Because I can tell you a lot of our very diverse, whether they're emerging or established leaders, their very next question when I ask them if they're interested on serving on a board is why? Aside from my skin color, why do they want me on this board? And so that's when I share two different conversations with a nonprofit. I say, one, you need to be honest about what you need that person to do. I need your affiliation, according to Krista's earlier example. I need a Hispanic representative on our board because our end user is Hispanic. And I need a female because we are very running low on female representation. And then because of your expertise, we're going to need to leverage that expertise in our community because of X, Y, and Z. You're being very honest with that applicant on the needs. And quite frankly, as board build, we prepare our candidate in much the same fashion. When I talk to diverse candidates, I said, look, when you go interview with a nonprofit and they ask you if you're interested or they're interested in you, ask that question, why? Aside from the diversity, why do you need me? And what do you need me to specifically do? Because if it is leveraging my minority network, then what does that include? Is it fundraising? Is it perspective? Is it resources? Those are all great conversations that need to happen from day one, because I can tell you those relationships move forward and they grow positively, because I can't tell you how many token conversations that I've had that get really ugly really quick. And so as an ED, you may be thinking you're doing the right thing by diversifying your board, but if you're not doing it for the right reason, you could set a pretty negative precedent out in the community.
In the community, and Pam, I'm going to come to you to jump in the community, because I'm also raising my hand because it's happened to me. But then when you have someone that has a certain type of reputation, it's not just in the community, it's in the rest of the ranks where you might be looking for other board members as well. Because now that negative experience or that feeling is communicated, right? And doesn't have to be in an adversarial way. It's just like, I don't know. I didn't feel comfortable. It just didn't feel right. I didn't feel valued. And I know I'm valuable, right? But, it just didn't feel right. And so I think those are the questions we have to be upfront. It's almost like when we are hiring and no one wants to put salaries in the job descriptions. Well, is it a big secret? Because they're going to have to find out eventually, right? And
Yeah.
so I actually don't want to do extra work with people who are not interested because of the range. I'd rather them know it ahead of time. So if it's not in their range, we all save time.
Mhm.
But Pam, I saw that you were getting ready to say something. I wanted to make sure
because I just wanted to expand a little bit beyond that expertise that we need on the board. I know your question was, who do we need on the board? And so I really think that we need to think about coming out of this pandemic. Who are those people that are really going to help drive the sustainability of the organization? And I really feel like, we need our lawyers. Yeah, we need our accountants, but we also need entrepreneurs these days. We need innovative thinkers. We need technology experts. That's going to, and we're turning into people younger than I am for sure for those technology experts. So I think that in addition to looking at the demographics, we also have to consider where we are right now and how you're going to bring sustainability to your organization.
Well, I'm gonna stay with you, Pam. So, how can diversity drive organizational performance? Can you give some examples of how a board might govern with an equity lens? Because I think it's important in this climate that we're in and the conversation. So it's not just talk, it's the practitioner, and just switching that lens. So any examples for those that are working on that now?
And that is exactly that practitioner. That's what the board is doing. They're setting those policies and practices. So that's where the board needs to start right away, looking at with that equity lens. How are the mission, vision, and values looked at through an equity lens? And even down to what we talked about before, when is your board meeting? Is your board meeting at a time that everybody is able to meet? And that's a hard thing to do. But, we, in this new module we put together, we use the example, if you're a board in education and you're meeting in the middle of the day, well, how many educators are available in the middle of the day? So that's one example. Putting together a DEI committee is another practical way to make sure that you're looking at the organization in an equity lens. Bringing in, celebrating those differences, bringing in, this month alone, I think there's a whole slew of different holidays that we're celebrating. Well, bring that out to the organization, celebrate those differences that we have. So those are just a few practical ideas that all the way from that policy stage to how you're treating your staff and how you're celebrating those differences. So just a few. John and Krista, do you have any other examples that you can think of right now, those practical examples that we've talked about? I put them on the spot. Ground rules, that's another thing. John, you had talked about those ground rules. Again, that's that act of equity and inclusion. Who brings the power to the board? Is it the biggest fundraiser? Well, maybe not. She may not or should not have that loudest voice just because of they have the greatest network. So again, thinking about ground rules and who has the power on your board and why. And I think we talked about best practices. We mentioned a best practice. Well, who set that best practice? So again, just look at everything through an equity lens.
Pam, you hit the nail on the head. Actually, those with the deepest pockets shouldn't have the loudest voices. Actually, within the statements for my organization, when we start talking about philanthropy, and it's part of our values in how we select people and who we work with, because we don't want people just because you have the deepest pockets. It means that you get to make the decisions. And that's one of the challenges within the sector right now, is that we're not centering community. and the people that we're serving and giving value to that first, and then centering our work around the needs of the community that we know to be true, and we've been able to document it. And so I'm glad you shared that, because it's so, I want to just go, yes, but I wanted you to finish talking first because it hits the nail on the head. And oftentimes, sometimes in North Texas, because we do have so much wealth, right? In terms of established wealth, older wealth, and newer wealth, just because of opportunities in employment, that people do believe that when I write the check or when I join a board and write the check and bring money to the table, that I can make different decisions. Well, just I would think from a liability perspective, if you're watering down the voices of people who may not be able to give at that level, then what are we really saying about governance and the importance of having other voices on your governing body? So, Krista, go ahead, John, before I ask Krista.
No, I
go
was
ahead.
just going to mention, when I speak to general nonprofits, I try to just set a bug in their ear that when you think about the minority communities, please don't jump to the conclusion that there's not wealth and resources in those communities. Right. And so when Pam spoke to this earlier, when you're talking about opening your organization up to different networks, there is a lot of wealth and resources within those communities. And quite frankly, there are probably a number of nonprofits that are doing exactly what you're trying to do there, that you have partnership opportunities. The second thing I would mention is, you know, a lot of these emerging millennials, if you don't include them and include them quick, they will be your competition. And so something that I talk to nonprofit boards about, especially mature boards, I'm like, we have to open up our thinking, because if we're set in our ways and if we're set on doing the same old, somebody will reinvent the wheel and be your competition. And so we have to think about this as a business and say, we can either go with the times and be flexible, or we will disappear at some point, unfortunately. So that's all I want.
At the end of the day, nonprofits are businesses that just happen to be charities and get a charitable designation status from the IRS, but the business still has to be run. And I think, you know, we also have to remind people when it comes to board and that collaborative relationship with the administrative team, you know, at the end of the day, no one owns this. That we all should be honored to be in a position, you know, from a board position, to be able to govern change in the community. And when we don't look at that change as an honor and it becomes more of, I get to do it, you know, it's a sense of entitlement. We've forgotten to put, you often say mission first, mission forward. We typically forget to look at it from that lens, and then we start to not make the best decisions from a governance perspective. So Krista, could you share, would you be able to share some ideas on how we can engage our boards to communicate our organization's unique value proposition? And before you answer that, can I also get you, for our friends that may be joining us that don't know what a unique value proposition is, if you could explain that and then answer.
Yes, of course. So a value proposition is your way of communicating the value that you bring that's unique to your end user. It can be the product or service that you offer. It can be your unique opinion or position on an issue, but it's what really sets you apart from others, maybe in a similar niche or space. And it communicates very quickly what you do and why you do it. So the value proposition, we just experienced this. Pam alluded to this earlier, but we had a couple board members reach out and say, I'm having a hard time easily communicating our value proposition, or I'm having a hard time with a little elevator pitch. Can you provide that to us? And so we were able to set up 3 levels of an elevator pitch based on the length of time, you know, that you have in the elevator, one being 1 sentence, the second being a few, and then that third being more of a paragraph of really explaining what we do, why we do it, and what our end user can experience or what they should expect from us. And I think that would be my first tip, is having that elevator pitch as a part of your board materials whenever they onboard, a part of that packet, you know, and so that from the very beginning, they can understand it and really wrap their heads around it. We also had a push in the very beginning. Whenever I first started with Board Build and first started working with the board, we created some social media templates for them. Something so simple that they could share their photo, put their headshot in there, and share with their audience that they are a board member, why they're a board member, what they're proud of. So we found ways, in addition to the elevator pitch, in addition to supporting them with social media, just found ways to really give them, and in the like the car biz world, which I used to be a part of automotive marketing in a past life, but we would say load their lips, right? You want to load their lips with something that it's easy for them to say, easy for them to express. And so it's been great. You know, we have a few core board members who really share those posts on social media. They're really comfortable. And my goal throughout the rest of this year is to help get the rest of them comfortable with communicating the value proposition.
That was good. Those were good suggestions in terms of, we think about that with like program participants, where, you know, it's not something sensitive in nature, or other people, donors, but how often do we give those types of orientation packets or campaign packets to our board members who may have networks on social media where that can be really advantageous for the organization?
One other thing I forgot, so sorry, John.
Okay.
We supported them with their bio, but their board bios, but also with, in the very beginning, we said, for example, if you're going to be sharing your own bio or you're going to be speaking at an event, we would love it if you would plug Board Build with these words. You can put this into your professional bio. You can say this if you're speaking at an event, or you can share this with your organization or with your team. And we did notice that certain board members started placing that on their LinkedIn and their professional bio. So it just helps expand the Board Build reach. And I really encourage you all to do the same, whatever packet, to Kim's point, that you can provide them during orientation to really bring them up to speed and make it easy for them to talk about you. John, sorry.
Well, I just wanted to touch a little bit on the fundraising piece, because you're right. And there are a few board of directors that are just not comfortable asking for money or resources, or even as simple as selling a table. And so the easier you can make this message, the better. And quite frankly, I've noticed in the community that people invest in by passion. I think people overall respect nonprofits and know that we're doing some good in the community. But when you have somebody on the other side of the table really expressing that passion, that why they're involved with this nonprofit and why you should get involved, that really loosens up that pocketbook to whoever they're talking to, right? And so if we can arm our board of directors, our committees, our ambassadors, and our staff with that passion of the message, that's where the money is going to come from.
Perfect. So Pam, I have a question for you. Do you have any tips or recommendations on board best practices for executive reviews? Because this is another conversation that typically doesn't happen, but it should.
You know, I recently saw that 45% of executive directors are never reviewed. That's a lot of questions out there. Like, am I doing a good job? Am I moving the organization forward? So I recommend that when you're doing your annual organizational review and setting those goals for the organization for the next year, that's time you also want to sit down with the executive director and set out, looking forward, what are those goals that you want to achieve from the executive director level who's managing mission fulfillment for the organization. So, excuse me, in your bylaws, it should state who is doing this executive review. And then that committee, or, you know, and typically it could be the executive committee, they're going to have a process set out how they're going to review the CEO. So make sure that within your organization is all set and it's an expectation, and do it on an annual basis so everybody can learn from one another. The other good thing about this is succession planning. You don't want to be find yourself all of a sudden looking for a new leader for your organization. So this will help you in your succession planning as well.
Awesome. Well, I have one question before we do have some questions in the Q&A, so I want to make sure we leave enough time for that. But John, I'm going to ask you this question so I don't have to be the person always saying this stuff over and over again.
Okay.
So many grant applications now require organizations to report the demographics of their board. You can't get around it most of the time anymore. So suppose we are recruiting to a specific demographic to create a more inclusive environment or one that represents those being served. Should we be transparent with the candidate and let them know we are recruiting them for the color of their skin or for their gender or for their age or for where they live, right? Because it just depends on who we are serving. Should we be transparent about our needs within the organization to create that more inclusive environment based on what our needs are and who we're serving?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the more transparent you can be, the better. Because quite frankly, candidates are already thinking it, right? Why am I being asked, especially if you're new to the organization, if you really don't know the organization that well or the board of directors, I mean, it's coming out of left field, so you're already thinking it. So you might as well have the conversation as blunt as possible and say, yes, we are seeking you out because of this, but that's not the only reason. I think I spoke about it to you earlier. These are some additional reasons, and that's why we're having this conversation. Because at the end of the day, as an ED, you want to know what attributes each board of directors bring to the table. So, right, yeah, I mean, I used to say this to our Hispanic businesses: you want to be the best possible business you can be, and you just happen to be Hispanic, right? And so it's the same, it applies here. We want you to be the best possible board of director, and you just happen to be whatever demographic that nonprofit was looking for at the time. And so if you can come with that mind frame and have those open, candid conversations, because it's not really the ask that can be offensive, it's the way you ask sometimes, right? And so if you know that walking in, I think both of you walk away from the table with the correct expectations.
And I think another thing, John, just to add on to that, is then we get to center the work a lot differently, because there's a reason why that's happening, right? And that we have to ask those questions, or we have to evaluate in our matrix a little bit differently, because there was a gap and we're trying to fill the opportunity. And it has nothing to do with affirmative action, it has everything to do with service. Right. And so if we're really paying attention to the organization, its need, cultural understanding, it's so many different things, right? There's so many variables that we want to be able, it goes back to Pam, what she was saying in the beginning about going upstream. This is part of it as well. We can't stay stuck in tradition of the way things were done. And sometimes board, I think Pam, it was in the beginning where you shared the percentage of white males that were in board governance positions. Well, when we look at the nonprofit sector and our community organizations, is that a representation of all of the various organizations that we see going through our communities? And if not, then tradition is not working in the way that it may have worked before, and however it worked. But everybody deserves an opportunity to be in organizations and on boards, as long as it's a great fit for what that organization is doing, right? And so I think we have to have more conversations, and they don't have to be uncomfortable. I think so many people are uncomfortable talking about it that it feels awkward. But if we just make it a standard of practice that we're paying attention to the people and the needs first, and the gaps on the board, and there's this opportunity to change something and become more efficient in the way and effective in the way that we operate, that's golden. And that's really, to me, the way that we need to look at things. Go ahead, John.
No, I was about to say it also goes on the other side of the page here too. We have a lot of minority organizations that now want to bring in more Caucasians onto their board. So the same rules of engagement apply, right? I think I spoke to a lady yesterday that said, I am the only Caucasian in the history of this organization. And so I'm already thinking they picked me because I'm white, but why else, John, are they thinking? Because because minority organizations have to adhere to the same rules as everybody else, right? We have to turn in the diversity numbers. We have a very mixed end user. And so the same rules apply, even if you're going the opposite way.
There's no cookie cutter way. And I think that's one of the misnomers in this whole conversation about diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, is that there's one cookie cutter way of doing it for everyone. And we're not really paying attention to the needs of the organization, where the organization is located, who's served by we just are not looking at the information for us to really get a really good grasp, and who are our supporters, right? From corporate to our everyday folks in the community. And how do we make sure there's just great representation? And I hope we get to the point. I've worked in, well, we called it equal opportunity back then. Names change over decades. But I often say we can continue to change names, but until we change practice and mindset, we're going to continue to have these types of issues. But what if we just made this a standard practice in the way that we approach building boards? Then we don't even, honestly, we don't have to worry about what people are asking us for, because we've already made it a standard practice, and we've made an intentional decision that we're not necessarily just selecting people because we have a need. We've just organically selected the right people, and it's always just feels inclusive. And if we could get to that point, it would be really great. And hopefully we can begin to see organizations move a little bit more fluidly in that direction. So I'm going to pause there because I can continue asking questions and adding comments, but we do have some great questions in the Q&A. So the first one we have that hasn't been answered is, in terms of contingency plans, please share what we can do to protect the founder with the board. This has been my fear to open to board members, but I understand it is crucial and necessary for growth. So please share what we can do. And I'll let you all answer, and then I'll add my 2 cents to that.
I think that might start, and I'll be interested in your comments as well, John. I think it might start at that budget level. And that ED is not responsible for that budget. That is a finance committee, and then executive committee, and the whole board approves that budget. And so I think that idea of having a plan A, a plan B, a plan C budget, always have that worst case scenario sitting in your back pocket that you can pivot to. And that is an ongoing conversation that your board needs to be having and you're, as the ED, you're presenting that position where you are at that moment. And then it's up to the board to look at that financial sustainability and make sure that as a team, they're working towards that. John, any additional thoughts on that?
I think it comes back to something you alluded to earlier, that trust. That's why it's so important to establish that trust up front, right? Because there's nothing that you can do worse than to shoot your founder or your ED in the foot than to not to be able to feel like you can share or be blunt about information that you're seeing. So it may be that we need to switch directions. It may mean that you see 5 different red flags in the financials and nobody's talking about it, and why, right? That's why I think it's so important that we come back to this command base, as I alluded to earlier. We need the right people in the right places that have permission to speak freely.
Yeah, it needs to be.
We're going to get a good picture.
That engaged board. There are so many boards that will just sit back and rubber stamp, but you need that engaged board. You need that practice of that people who are potentially as that devil's advocate, or people that are going to bring up the various scenarios that you might be looking at. So that trust and that communication that you establish, and that's that cultural sense of inclusion.
So, and I'll just add, because I guess as a founder, I also heard the question a little differently.
Okay.
And so I want to add this in case this is the way that it's being asked. And this is a standard. So if anybody's been trained by me that's on here, you've heard me say this like a broken record. You will always be the founder. You will not always be guaranteed to be in leadership. A board that is doing their job has the right to remove you if you are not the right fit for the organization. A nonprofit is not owned by any one person. A nonprofit is owned by the people. The people contribute to a 501c3 public charity, which means you don't get to set up the structure so that you are in a protected position. Because what in essence, everything that we've been talking about today, you water down the power of what a board's responsibility is. And so that becomes a legal liability. So the second part was opening this up to new board members. You're worried about what might happen if board members don't like you. There's always a possibility, even when people do like you. That's number one. But you don't want to be in a position, and you don't want to build an organization where you put your protection before the protection of the mission. Right? And it's the same on both sides. You don't want to put protection on board members who aren't effective, who aren't showing up for meetings, who aren't doing their jobs, who are not doing the give and get if that's a requirement for your organization. So I just want to add, as founders, for those of you on this training that are founders, you've got to remove founder syndrome. If you're really trying, if you're operating a 501c3, you don't come first. And it's important that you really digest that so that you can actually do the work upstream. And so many times, I know there was an incident over the holiday season where this actually came to play between a board and the founder of 10 years. And everyone was in an uproar that they can't do that. Actually, they can. And it is their legal responsibility to protect the organization first, not a person. But I think it's also important to add that if we're working collaboratively on the board governance side and on the administrative leadership side, if everyone understands what it takes, it doesn't mean that you won't hit some roadblocks in terms of understanding, because one is running day to day and one has general oversight of the whole organization. So any type of disagreements doesn't mean it needs to go, to the pot, but it does mean that there's something that needs to work out. And just like in families have disagreements and then they get back together for the holidays because they've worked through it. The goal is, how do you work through it? And if you select right, and you select people that are focused on the mission first, and it's a collective group, and so DEI is not just about race and age. DEI means, when we're talking about inclusion, it means you're getting different voices. If these collective voices from all over, John mentioned, not just going to your network, but if you're getting voices from all over, and all of these collective voices have a similar concern, it's no longer the board, it might be you. And you have to be able to accept that so we can eradicate the issues, or work like we are trying to eradicate whatever issues or challenges that are in the community. So I heard that just a little bit differently, because I think we can take it in various ways, but as a founder, that's often what I hear. Like, I don't want to bring, I was in a social media group and I had to leave because the woman said, that's why I have 51% of the vote on the board. How is that possible? ED. I remember saying, I don't even want to know what the name of the organization is. So I'm gonna exit now so that I don't hear anything that is really inappropriate. But we just have to remember that it's about the mission, the work first. And be okay with not being the person. I knew when I founded Cause Studio, before we transitioned it out of being a nonprofit, I knew that there was going to be someone younger and more innovative than me, that wasn't as attached to the vision as I was, that if I turned it over, could potentially take the idea to a level I couldn't even imagine because I was so close to it. So let's make sure we're leaving room for that to happen. And that it doesn't feel offensive, that it just might be a good decision for the organization. But if you're partnering well and you're working well together and you're keeping these lines of communication over and you're selecting right, on the board and on the administrative side, you might not have to deal with that, but there's always a possibility.
Mhm.
So let's see. Second question, we just have a few. So does the panel think that all board votes should be unanimous, or is the occasional split vote indicative of a board that truly encourages healthy debate? That's a good one too.
I am all for people opposing me and my views because I am going to learn something. And that is why I love working with really smart, talented people, is I'm going to learn something from them. So yes, that's that healthy debate. I'm perfectly satisfied if a vote is not unanimous. And in fact, if it is unanimous too many times in a row, then that's a rubber stamping board and they're not doing their job. So I heartily think that that healthy conversations and votes that are not unanimous will help drive that organization to where they need to be.
And I also think, Pam, to your point, when we see rubber stamping, for those of you that are approaching or are already in audit seasons in your organizations, auditors do ask for board minutes. Auditors do ask for confirmation of who said yes, who said no, with changes in policies and bylaws. And if everything just seems like everybody said yes, but there's clearly some other things happening within the organization, it could potentially prompt some other questions you're probably not prepared for. So healthy debate is great. And I am like Pam, I'm okay with sitting on the island by myself.
Oh, yeah.
I am, because it means I just have a different perspective than everyone else. And if I'm truly honoring my responsibilities as a board member, I'm going to sit on the island. You don't have to change my mind. And just according to bylaws, you all shouldn't be taking votes anyway unless you have a quorum according to your bylaws. And so if you are really practicing some of the traditional practices around that, chances are you're not going to always get unanimous. Easy stuff, consent agenda things, and that leads into the next question as well, maybe. But healthy debate is actually good debate because you're bringing some other factors to the table, in my opinion. So then we have someone that asked, so speaking of consent agenda, so is the consent agenda something that is written into the bylaws? Do you think consent agenda in terms of the practice itself needs to be written into bylaws?
I don't believe so, but you may have more knowledge in this on that, Kimberly, but I've never seen it written in bylaws before.
I would recommend that it be at a minimum a policy for the board, in terms of like policies that are reviewed rather than a standard. But I would also recommend that you check with someone that can provide you with legal advice for your organization. But to me, that becomes a policy because that's a standard practice in how we're operating our meetings, and not something that the quorum is one thing in terms of we can't take votes unless there's a quorum, and that's in the bylaws. But how we move the meeting becomes a practice of how to facilitate an effective board meeting. And so for me, consent agenda and the definition for consent agenda for your organization becomes a policy for the board, and how they operate in an effective way. So that would be my opinion on that. And then to just check with whoever's providing or can provide some legal oversight for your organization based on the way that your bylaws are written right now too.
And typically we really get nonprofits to really review their bylaws every few years anyway. So if it becomes an issue past the policy, setting, then yeah, maybe you may need to put something more in stone. And quite honestly, if you're a healthy nonprofit that's open to healthy conversations, that every couple of years when you're reviewing those bylaws, those are the times to review and update if you need it.
Mm-hmm. And those of you that were participated last week, we talked about different policies that a board would review and the frequency in which they reviewed them. And so if you were interested in adding the consent agenda concept and you looked at it as more of a policy in terms of how to run a more effective board meeting, then that's something that you could add to that list that we talked about last week. And so we have one other question in the Q&A section. And it says, any guidance on various board members reaching out? So it kind of plays into an earlier question. Any guidance on various board members reaching out to the ED outside of meetings? Should the communication be funneled through the board chair, or is direct communication to the ED ideal? Any thoughts?
John, do you want to take it? I
Yeah,
see your
both
wheels are
sides.
going.
No, I see both sides because, for a board of director, especially a new board of director, having those sidebar conversations and having those and going out and doing prospecting and events with your ED gives you a better sense of the day-to-day and a feel for the organization and where it stands. And it honestly gives just a better perspective, right? Especially the new board of directors. On the flip side, for a lot of years, boards have been trying to eliminate cliques, right? So if you feel like certain board of directors have the ED's ear more than others, then that could become a potential issue. So I could see both sides. I think it's healthy to know to the best of your ability who's running this organization, but it has to be fair and balanced. That all board of directors have the same access. Otherwise, it could come across as cliquish or one-sided.
And from my perspective, those relationships and the trust that I develop and the communication I develop is really important to me. So I'm quite open to the idea of having conversations with each board member. The one thing that's very important, and I have to remind myself of this regularly, is I need to protect myself and my own bandwidth. Executive directors and leaders in nonprofits right now are so overworked. And I have one board member who will, without fail, every weekend email me, and I will not respond to that person on the weekend. So you just need to set, while I do think it's important that I have a good relationship with each one of my board members, I also need to protect myself.
We don't talk about that enough in terms of, because it's up the conversation, that we do have to establish some levels of boundaries and self-care in running organizations, and just establishing, to me, what we hope to maintain are healthy relationships with our board members and with our administrative teams as well. And those boundaries are needed because you're technically not working 24 hours a day. And we do, because sometimes of the heaviness of the work or just the rigor of the work that we're doing, that you do have to establish some of those boundaries. I know that for some organizations, it just depends upon the culture that's been built by the board. Some people, it's totally fine for board members to reach out to the executive directors, and others are a little bit more protective of the ED where things are going through the chair so that the ED is not overwhelmed. Right. And so I really think it's about the culture of the organization. And the other thing that I would say around that as well is, when all of these side conversations are happening, that you want to make sure that you're still being transparent and not holding it like, I had a private conversation with one, then I had a private conversation with another, because that too can build division, not just between you and board members, but within the board. And that can really be avoided. So I'm one of those people, well, I had a conversation last week and I just want to share the updates with everyone, like during a board meeting. And so it's not as if we had this private conversation, because I'm really doing public work. And I want to make sure that people realize that my focus, again, mission first, mission forward. And unless it's more confidential in nature, and I do have to have that singular conversation for a particular reason, that might be a little bit different because it might be tied to a liability. But for the most part, I may be giving this information to John because John is in front of me and we're having a conversation. But the information I'm giving to John also goes to Pam, and it's also going to go to Krista, because if it's that important, then I need for the board to be aware. And unless John has committed to taking that information back, I need for everybody to be aware of what's happening. So I'm not caught up in something else that might be brewing, because my concentration is on the mission and the people. Mission first, mission forward. Oh, 2 more questions popped in. Let me just keep track of time. And these are going to be our last 2, because we actually have gone almost the full distance, right? So if a board is meeting fairly infrequently, such as once or twice a year, is it a concern that the previous board minutes haven't been approved yet for an audit? I'm going to read that again. If a board is meeting fairly infrequently, such as once or twice a year, is it a concern that the previous board minutes haven't been approved yet for an audit? I have an answer, but I'm going to let you all. So your board should be meeting at a minimum 4 times a year.
Yes.
Your board should be meeting, they are the governing body. Your board should be meeting at a minimum 4 times a year. And that means that realistically, because so much has changed in the world and the way that we're doing work, I would recommend that your board visit, if it's not already a practice, what does electronic voting look like? It is not an abnormal practice and hasn't been for actually decades, even pre-pandemic. For decades, because Outlook used to be the way that most of us voted electronically, because you could send things out and people could actually vote yes or no, and probably still can. And so if there's a problem with the frequency of meetings, if you're only meeting twice, I would actually revisit that with your board, with the board. But if the problem is you're moving towards minutes, and the minutes just haven't been approved because the next cycle, and now you're at least meeting 4 times a year. If that's a concern, I would recommend looking at, well, we know we have an audit coming up. We don't have a meeting, which actually, if you're getting ready to have an audit, you should have a meeting before the audit anyway. But if you don't, I would recommend having those minutes sent out electronically for review and approval if that is a concern. But if you are preparing for an audit, and it sounds like it could be your first audit, or if it might be a question, twice a month, twice a year meetings, just from my background, twice a year meetings are probably not going to be best for an audit. So just as an FYI, that might be something that you all want to look at, so that you can get at least into what's the standard practice, and it's a minimum of 4 a year. Go ahead, John.
Well, just a quick note. I mean, I always looked at approving the minutes as just a CYA, as an ED. I needed to feel comfortable that from one meeting to the next, however frequent that you're meeting, that people at least had the opportunity to read through the information and understand it. And so by approving the minutes, then you are consenting that you have, whether you have or not, you had the opportunity to review the minutes, and everybody was in consensus to approve it. And so as an ED, it just helps you sleep a little easier if you know everybody had the opportunity to be on the same page.
I would actually be more concerned with bylaws. Like if there was a change in a bylaw or a financial policy that required an actual vote, that the record of that vote is captured, because that is something that an auditor would ask for. So something like that would probably have a different level of urgency. But again, if you have an audit coming up and you're auditing for the prior year, before you're moving to your entrance meeting for an audit, quite honestly, the board should be meeting before then, to prepare for the audit and the pre-work that needs to be done. So the final question, because I want to be respectful of time, speaking of EDs being overworked currently, is it possible to have both a CEO and an ED in a nonprofit where the CEO is managing the day-to-day execution of the programs and the ED is fundraising within the board and larger strategy? Do you want me to take that one?
Yeah, I was hoping you would, because I've not heard of that situation ever.
So I think people use CEO and ED too loosely. And CEO and executive director have very different operational structures. You may have a CEO And then you may have directors under that, or vice presidents under, or chiefs. So you all have different layers. So if you're looking at somebody that's just going to look at fundraising, that's really a chief development officer or vice president of development. If you're looking at somebody that works exclusively with the board instead of the CEO, that sounds like a chief of staff or a chief operating officer or the executive assistant to the CEO. But it really, we utilize terminology before we have an understanding of organizational structure. So when people say president and CEO, it's synonymous for many people to executive director. So what is the organizational structure going to look like under an ED? What is the organizational structure going to look like under a CEO? My recommendation is understand structures, business structures in that terminology before setting, because if you're just starting out or you have something you're not sure how to expand on it, do a little research, because there's nothing worse than creating a structure and what it says is confusion to people, because it's going to impact potential good board members coming your way because they're not going to understand it. What makes sense to you that's not good for the organization is confusion. So just make sure you do your research on that so that it is effective for you. So we are out of time. And we didn't know if we would go the full 2 hours, and we did, because these questions and this conversation has been robust. First, I want to thank Krista, John, and Pam for your time today, for your presentation, for your willingness to just answer questions for this community. And Pam or Krista, if you want to bring up the slide one more time so people can have your contact information. I am just appreciative of you. I'm appreciative that you are in our community. I'm appreciative of the fact that you set aside time as a full team to serve us today. We don't take that lightly. And I'm just excited that you're here. For those of you that were with us last week, and those of you that were with us this week and plan to be with us for our third and final session next week, I'm excited to have you back. Last week, we will tie in last week and this week to our final and third week next week, which we're really going to talk about how to build that highly structured and evaluate the effectiveness and efficiency of the nonprofit board. And so with that being said, on behalf of the University of North Texas at Dallas, all of the internal partners, Board Build, My Company Giving, Blueprint, and our nonprofit training initiative, Cause Studio, I thank you all for sharing your time again with us and trusting us to provide guidance and advice for you as you all continue to build healthier nonprofit boards. Please reach out to Board Build if you're interested in learning more about their resources, and also take advantage of these resources. These are great to have, and we are, like I said, it's magic to be able to have that in North Texas. This is not something that we see around the country. So Board Build team, I thank you again. I look forward to working with you all again and continuing to refer people your way. Attendees, thank you all for sharing your time with us, and we will see you all again next week. Have a good one. Bye-bye. Let's see.